Hello, I'm Marshall Glock. This is my informative speech for my public speaking class. This is my audience members, my parents, and my grandparents. I will now be handing the camera to my mother, and I will begin my speech. In his Conservation as a National Duty speech presented to the state governors in 1908, Theodore Roosevelt stated, "There comes that increase in which an average man demands from the resources. He is apt to grow to lose the sense of his dependence upon nature." Our country continues to fight the same conservation battles today that President Roosevelt referred to in 1908. Farmers continue to try and create a balance between the demands placed on the land and the need to conservatively use resources to produce crops. Fortunately, my family has utilized measures to decrease erosion on our farm for nearly 60 years. Those conservation measures have proved valuable when considering the flooding and erosion caused by heavy rains in the spring of 2016. My father cannot remember my great-grandfather's farm prior to terracing the property in 1948. My grandfather, Eugene, and his father, Theodore, had the terraces installed when my father was very young. Grandpa Eugene was concerned that topsoil was being lost due to erosion on the sloping areas of the farm ground, not in native pasture. According to Wheaton and Monkey, terracing is a soil conservation practice applied to prevent rainfall runoff on sloping land and accumulating and causing serious erosion. Terraces consist of ridges and channels constructed across the slope. Simply, rainwater is slowed and rerouted on its path from higher to lower ground. A government agency, known as the Soil Conservation Service, assisted the design of the project. The water diverted by the terraces accumulated into 2 ponds, constructed as part of the effort. As the ponds reached capacity, excess water allowed to exit through the overflow tubes into the low-lying areas below. From there, the water flows to the nearby North Fork of the Big Blue River. The water contained by the ponds may be used as a source of irrigation. One pond has trees and other woody shrubs planted around it for a wildlife habitat. The decades of the 1980s through today have presented some challenges for agriculture. When my family seized their cattle enterprise in the 1980s, there was no longer a need for pasture land. To gain benefit from the former pasture land, row crops such as corn and soybeans would be planted on the sloping ground. Farmable parallel terraces were installed on these fields to allow for crop production without threatening the integrity of the topsoil with uncontrollable erosion. Some of the terraces were storage terraces. According to Wheaton and Monk, terraces that are constructed in parallel and discharging runoff throughout surface area drains are known as parallel tile outlet terraces. The surface inlet, called a riser, has a restricted section to control the discharge rate, causing some of the runoff to be temporarily stored. This storage period is long enough for sediment to settle out of the water, but not so long as to damage the crops. In a personal interview conducted on June 10, 2016 with my father, Ted Glock, after graduating from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 1986, he returned home to operate the family farm enterprise. A farm owned by my great-grandmother and Grandpa Eugene had a portion of the field that was very rough and prone to erosion, with a water drainage area called a draw running through it. In 1988, Great-Grandma Esther and Grandpa Eugene enrolled our farm in the Conservation Research Program, or CRP. This program pays owners to put the land into a system which lessens erosion. My father stated that he could recognize an improvement in the soil health within 3 years. In the decade of the 2000s, another form of the CRP program was utilized on our family property. Buffer strips were added to further slow the pace of runoff water as it left the cropland and entered the terraces built in the 60s. According to the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation District, or NRCS, filter or buffer strips are made of thick native grasses which contribute to the cleaning of the discharge water by catching loose silt. With these structures in place and other at-risk land establishments in native grass, our family moved towards other practices that would lessen probability of erosion. Grandpa and Dad explored methods which would save time, fuel, and natural resources. They have been using no-till and reduced tillage to accomplish this goal. According to a feature article written by Mike Wilson about no-till farming practices in the May and June 2016 issue of Farm Futures magazine, what's old is new again, and more farmers use no-till to rebuild soils and yields. Rather than till the earth, which buries residue, we plant into the soil with the residue intact. The residue on the surface helps to shield the soil from the impact of rain, especially heavy rain events. The residue, on its way to the buffer strips, terraces, outlets, and ponds is slowed. The surface residue also aids in protection from wind erosion. Think of a windy spring day, when the crops have just been planted. The exposed soil is easily taken into the airstream when there is little to no hole in it. Residue on the surface helps hold moisture, which keeps the soil structure in larger pieces and is far less likely to be displaced by these subtle Nebraska winds. I'm fortunate that previous generations and interest in preserving the land through the creation of terraces, ponds, and tile outlets. Additional practices, including participation in federal CRP programs, have also been an important practice of our family farm and the desire to keep the land viable. Finally, by practicing reduced tillage, residues such as corn stalks and soybeans stubble remain to aid the reduction of erosion caused by wind. Hopefully, through the continued utilization of these conservation practices, the land will remain fertile for future generations of the Glock family.